But aloha mai kako, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Pahos Kaskan, and I serve as the Senior Program Developer with the College of Professional and Continuing Education here at Cal State Long Beach. On behalf of CPACE and our certificate in Interfaith Leadership program, we want to thank you for joining tonight's conversation, working with diverse communities and why religious literacy is a career asset. We're especially grateful that you've chosen to spend part of your evening with us. And I know for some of us, it's late, especially some of us who are in this chat who are watching the World Cup religiously. I'm not going to name names. But today's conversation is rooted in a simple but increasingly important reality. We live and work in a world that's incredibly diverse and more so, very complicated. Whether we work in education, healthcare, government, nonprofit organizations, business, logistics, or community services, we regularly interact with people whose religious, spiritual, cultural, and ethical backgrounds may differ from our own. Yet, despite that reality, many professionals receive little to no formal training on how to navigate those differences thoroughly and respectfully. Religious literacy is not simply about learning facts about different faith traditions. Rather, it is about developing an awareness, curiosity, and communication skills necessary to build trust, foster belonging, and work effectively across lines of difference. In many ways, this is very much a leadership skill. It is also a community building skill, and increasingly very much so a professional skill. Tonight, we'll explore why religious literacy matters in contemporary workplaces and communities, how interfaith engagements can strengthen our ability to collaborate across differences, and what practical skills individuals can develop to become more effective leaders, colleagues, and community members. I'm honored to be joined by two incredible Cal State Long Beach educators and practitioners in this space. First, we're joined by Dr. John Becker, a lecturer in religious studies at Cal State Long Beach, whose work focuses on interfaith dialogue, contemporary theology, and the role of religion in addressing today's social and environmental challenges. Through his teaching, scholarship, and community engagement, he helps individuals and organizations better understand and navigate religious diversity in an increasingly interconnected world. We are also pleased to welcome Dr. Jessica Spence Moss, an interfaith scholar and educator whose work centers on building understanding and collaboration across religious, spiritual, and secular communities. Drawing on years of experience in interfaith leadership and community engagement, Jessica is passionate about creating spaces where people can connect across difference and work together towards more inclusive and resilient communities. Together, they have helped shape Cal State Long Beach's Certificate in Interfaith Leadership program, which is designed to equip students, professionals, and community leaders with the knowledge and skills needed to engage thoughtfully and effectively in an increasingly diverse society. Throughout tonight's conversation, I will be serving as your moderator, and we encourage you to use your Q&A feature to submit questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to address as many possible questions during our discussion. Thank you for being here, and we hope that tonight's conversation leaves you with new ideas, new perspectives, and perhaps a new appreciation for the role that curiosity, understanding, and human connection play in our professional and personal lives. With that, let's begin. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jessica and John, I know that Robin made you co-host, so if you need to share anything, feel free to do so.
Do you want us to individually start like with our kind of introductions and backgrounds, or do you want to start with questions?
Let's go ahead and start with your introductions and what you see the theme of today's theme is going.
John, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'll let you set the tempo here.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of places I could go, but I'll just go with kind of the whole spoke to my background as just a general interfaith community person, but I'll share a little bit more about that. My interfaith journey, as a lot of people in interfaith spaces, started right after 9/11. A lot of we see a lot of community interfaith pop up right after 9/11, this awareness of religious diversity, and also the biases, stereotypes, discrimination that people experienced as a result of 9/11. We're coming up on the 25th anniversary of that. And so for me, I became aware because I had friends that were from a lot of different religious and non-religious backgrounds. And 9/11 had an impact on their lives. A little bit later, in my freshman year of college, I took a world religions class in which I was not exposed to all of the world's religions. I was exposed to the big five, which John can talk a little bit more about. And a lot of the other world religions were seen as secondary or not as important or not as real. And that kind of created a little bit of tension within me. And then fast forward to 2010, we had a lot of political kind of resurgence of anti-Muslim, just really any non-Christian tradition was being kind of demonized. And that kind of sparked something in me where I started to more intentionally engage with religious diversity. And so moving on into my PhD work, I worked with a lot of women and non-binary folks specifically, looking at how they engage with religious diversity on a personal level, what motivates them to be in these spaces, why they see it as an important, I guess, skill to have in as far as engaging in religious difference and becoming more confident in talking about their own religious identities, as well as becoming more curious in their coworkers, their neighbors, their friends, families, and so on and so forth. So that is what I spent the last 15 plus years of my life working through. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk more about it tonight.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo quite a bit with Jessica. I know she's younger than me. We don't have to go into specifics here, but 9/11 was a huge turning point when it came to interfaith circles. I'll age myself. I was only a senior in high school when that happened. And I know a lot of my students today have no recollection of 9/11 and the impact that it had. But prior to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about soccer. World Cup's going on, but I played club soccer for most of my life, and I had several Muslim students on my team. And I remember one instance in particular, and that was we had a tournament up in Bakersfield. So if you're familiar with Bakersfield, it's a very hot, dry, arid area. And of course, soccer tournaments always happen during the summer. And it was during the month of Ramadan, and I saw several of my teammates just swishing water around in their mouth and then spitting it out. I think I was like 14 at the time. And from there, we remained kind of like a curiosity about different worldviews, about different religious perspectives, about essentially how to be human. It wasn't until 9/11, so a few years later, that it really, I'll say it kind of galvanized my interest in religion, but also, as Jessica mentioned, kind of fighting back against these stereotypes. Because so many of my friends that I grew up with that were Muslim were being depicted as something other. And this is something that is also very close to the Jewish community as well. And there's just so many misinformed kind of understandings and perceptions out there that I really took it upon myself to become more knowledgeable in these different faith traditions, get engaged with these other communities, in the hope to dispel a lot of these misconceptions. Now, my work tended to be a bit more theoretical. And so my BA, my master's is in history, kind of looking at religious histories, but my PhD was in comparative religions, and it dealt more with religious pluralism, and that is trying to make sense of notions of truth claims between competing religions. And this also includes secularism. And this is something that Jessica and I might just want to highlight here, is that religion just has a certain connotation. Everyone knows that kind of language, But what we're really talking about here is worldviews or like life orientations, right? And this is why Jessica mentioned secularism is part of this conversation because there's certain assumptions that are guiding their lives, just like any type of faithful religious practitioner as well. And so everyone's part of this conversation, really. And so I was trying to identify different models of these truth claims because, for the most part, people think that there's only one model. And this tends to be this notion of exclusivity, right? There is only one truth. But after conducting my research, and I found a very vibrant conversation around different notions of truth within religious traditions. And from that more theoretical stance, I decided to become more engaged in interfaith circles. And this is essentially where I find myself today. Again, just sharing the kind of existential reward that comes along with studying religions and coming to know your neighbors, but also kind of displacing this rhetoric that just really has no place anywhere built around these misconceptions.
That's great, guys. And so I think what's unique and important, John, what you just mentioned was how interfaith work can help us learn how to be human. And so maybe in terms of the topic, today's topic, and the discussion, both you and Jessica can venture into why that idea is so important in today's workplaces and to the communities that we serve.
Yeah, I'm going to start with this because as we were going over some of the potential questions that we would talk about today, the question that I've spent the most time kind of analyzing and going over in my mind is this question of like, how do we create, like, we talk a lot about like workplace culture and like creating an open and inclusive workplace culture, and where does interfaith fit into that? And to me, as someone that has been doing this work for 15 plus years, it's like my response is like, well, duh, religious, ethical, moral, cultural identity is core to anyone's being, and therefore it's an important thing to bring into the workplace. Um, but then, like, as I was doing like quick Google searches, like, what are the kind of the top um, perspectives or policy procedure, whatever language we want to use, that people are focusing on when it comes to creating these positive workplace cultures. And so there's like open communication, there's opportunity for growth. But it was interesting to me, a lot of the cultural pieces, a lot of them would mention something about empathy, having a workplace that is an empathetic workplace. Um, and while none of them explicitly mentioned peace, um, that is the thing that kept coming into my mind is like, I personally, and I'm assuming a lot of people want to be in a workplace that is peaceful on some level. Like you don't want to go into a workplace always like feeling burden and on edge, right? And this is when we get to burnout and all of these things. And so I was thinking about that a little bit more and thinking about how if we're engaging in interfaith and we're trying to learn skills that help us create cultures of empathy, cultures of openness, um, like all of the DEI projects out there, like the end result is we want to create peaceful workplaces, places that people actually want to be. And that's what most religions are trying to create as well. Like if you could Google any religion and put peace attached to it, and every religion has some concept of peace. And so I think as we're trying to figure out like why are we having this conversation, it's because people are searching for a sense of calm, of peace, of connection. Um, and if we're going to be spending a majority of our lives in the workplace, whether it's physically in the workplace or just like mentally doing labor, right? We should be focusing on creating spaces that are in line with trying to create peaceful communities, peaceful societies. Um, and that's kind of where I'm like living right now is this idea of taking it from these policies and procedures of like DEI to like what's the root of it? Like we want to feel calm. We want to feel peace. And I think for me personally, I think interfaith is one of those skills that helps us get there. I don't know if John wants to that or counter that.
No, counter, never counter Jessica. I will say that within a workspace, I think what's lacking, um, it seems to be I mean, the notion of empathy was mentioned, but something that was also mentioned earlier is like this notion of curiosity, right? This kind of open-mindedness to exploring differences that maybe we're uncomfortable with. If it's a workplace where you're expecting just to go and hammer out your day and come home, if that's your expectations, um, then maybe you're not going to be interested in like kind of building this peaceful workplace that Jessica is mentioning here. You're rather just doing the 9 to 5 and kind of get home. But if we look at the workplace as an opportunity to engage with what it means to be human on different levels, right? And this by no means is just religious. Of course, we focus on interfaith here. But like what does it mean to be a Sikh follower in the United States? What does it mean to be a secular humanist in the United States? These are opportunities that we come across all the time. Oftentimes, I joke with my students that it's a Thursday night and a Jew, a Catholic, and a Hindu walk into a bar. It sounds like you're setting up a joke, but this is like a typical Thursday now in the United States, and in particular, California, one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world. And so, not to appreciate those differences just find so problematic across the board for me. And again, I tend to think in terms of like existential, right? And I know people are always looking for like these skill sets that can translated to business and like industry. But I mean, what more do you want than that type of existential reward to see what it means to be human across different cultures, across different identities? It's just rewarding in itself. And I think understanding those nuances then can be translated into a very powerful type of toolkit, especially for leadership, right? Being able to engage in an appropriate and respectful manner across the board, I think would lead to that type of peaceful workplace that Jessica's mentioning. I mean, I started thinking of these illustrations very similar to Jessica early on. It's, we're cogs in a machine to an extent. I don't like the kind of atomistic kind of approach to that, but a well-oiled machine, I mean, works kind of with importance, with urgency, with this type of drivenness. And so if leadership or those in leadership are able to kind of grease the wheels in that capacity, I think that kind of aligns with what Jessica's mentioning here is that looking for peace.
Mhm. I'm going to bounce off of that one more time because I shared this with Bahol earlier. So Elaine Eklund from Rice University does a lot of work on like religion in the workplace, atheism in the workplace, just general morals, values. And it's interesting. One of the stats that I use a lot is 41% of the people that she interviewed and the data that she collected, 41% of people think like we should ignore religion because they don't have, and this is me adding to this, because I don't think we have built the skill set to engage with religion or moral, ethical ideas, right? On the flip side, 53% of people think we do need to engage with religion and do need to build understanding. And so those are the people that are like, okay, wait, this is important, but I still don't know how to do it. And I think that 41%, I think a lot of them would probably move over to yeah, we need to engage with religion if they had the skills, if they were in workspaces where there was leadership that created and cultivated space that allowed for religious, ethical, moral diversity to be not front and center, but to be part of the culture.
And just to bounce off that, a rebound here as well as, I mean, I think this goes across different, very important subjects that we can kind of see manifesting today. I mean, I'm just going back to the adage that we always hear, right? Never talk about religion or politics at the dinner table. But this has led to, I think, devastating effects. Because now, as we could see in the political discourse, we could see in religious discourse, no one knows how to have a kind of sensible, constructive conversation without it turning into some type of critique or some type of, for lack of a better term, like this type of apologetic. This is like a religious term talking about like how to defend your position, right, without this type of rhetoric. Um, and so it's a skill set beyond that, being able to constructively talk with others about these very important, very human subjects that I think really guide a lot of people's opinions, attitudes, and so forth. And so, yeah, giving them the skill set. And I think this is what we were trying to do with the course, in that trying to open up this space to have these type of conversations in a non-combative, non-presumptuous way.
I think these are great discussions we're having, and I think I know we had a set of questions that we had all agreed upon, but as we're having this discussion, I think I'm left with more lines of inquiry. That I'm like, okay, well, what about this? What about that? So one of the things that was mentioned was empathy. And Jessica, you mentioned it. I think John, you also hinted towards it as well. Empathy has always been a big part of my life. It's very important, especially as the son of immigrants, as a queer man of color. And I believe it sits at the heart of effective leadership and meaningful service to others. The idea is often described as the ability to understand another person's perspective, but it can mean different things to different people. As we see in today's social climate and the current political climate, like people define things very differently. You know, why do you both of you? Why do you believe empathy is so central to interfaith work? And how can developing empathy help us build stronger workplaces, communities, and relationships? How does, for instance, our certificate program, Certificate in Interfaith Leadership, help us cultivate that skill?
I'm going to give a couple of examples that are very recent for me. And it gets at this idea of empathy, even though well, I'll just share it and then you'll let me know. So my oldest kid just graduated, promoted from fifth grade. I have been sending since his kindergarten year, so 6 years, an interfaith calendar to his principal and to his teachers, with a note that says, like, we live in a very rich, diverse community, and being aware of each other's religious practices and holidays would go a long way to helping our school culture feel more included and feel more just would bring us together, right? Would cultivate empathy, because we see like the different holidays and the different reasons that certain days are important. Um, to my knowledge, I don't think they've ever really explicitly done anything with this calendar. But on his promotion happened to be, I don't know who scheduled this. I don't know if it was on the district level or what, but his promotion day was on Eid, which is one of the holiest days in the Muslim calendar. And two of his best friends are Muslim. Their moms also participate in like PTA stuff. And so the night before promotion and the morning of promotion, I was there making balloon arches and all of these things. And as they start letting all of the parents in to sit down at like 8:30 in the morning, his one friend, his mom comes up to me and she says, "Everything looks so beautiful, Jessica. Thank you so much for doing all of this work. I am so sorry I couldn't be here to help. I'm sorry I couldn't be here to participate in making this a special day for our children." And I was like, "It's totally fine." And she said, "I had to wake up extra early to get to the mosque so I could pray, to run here to watch our kids promote, and then we'll go back and do more, like do our other um, prayers and things. And to me, like the fact that we live in a community, in a society where families have to choose between their religious commitments and obligations and celebrating something as important to families as their child's promotion, um, to me shows kind of, I'm not going to say a lack of empathy, but a lack of awareness that leads people to feel like they're not as um, important. And I like the whole day, I was just thinking like no one would, like we're in a majority Christian nation, no one would think to have a promotion on Easter or Christmas, and people would be up in arms if we attempted to do it, even within a week of those holidays, right? And so for me, whether we're in healthcare, education, a I don't a large corporation, um, like the starting line is being aware of this religious diversity, and that allows us to create spaces that allow for empathy, allow for an awareness of difference, and make people feel included, um, as opposed to having to shuffle our lives around. So that's just like one example, that's all of 2.5 weeks old for me.
Yeah, I think I'll touch a little bit different. So, yeah, empathy is crucially important, but I think I want to highlight kind of like the other side of empathy. And for me, I find that to be humility. And I think that's important in the sense that maybe we should stop using our own religious convictions, our own ideas as kind of like the criteria by which we operate our world. And so when we kind of do this introspection, that we should be humbled, that we should have some type of humility in seeing that there might be different possibilities, there might be different observations, there might be different observances that are going on certain times. I think kind of points, right? It's almost like the backside of sympathy and being empathetic, in the realization that, we are always operating within our own worldview, but that one worldview should not become the sole standard. Um, and it's not to say that we should get rid of that worldview, right? That would be completely problematic within interfaith spaces. No one's going to get rid of uh, their confession, their convictions so easily, but rather recognition that there are other convictions and other um, commitments out there that may not align with ours. And so being humble enough to kind of recognize that and kind of work through the messiness, because there is a lot of messiness there, right? It could be confounding to try and work through all the different identities, all the different religious traditions being represented, to find something that works. But ultimately, I think it's worthwhile. And for the most part, I think most people, and I mean, Jessica's friend's a perfect example of that. I mean, they'll take it in good faith, right? They'll realize that this wasn't done intentionally. It's probably just a lack of awareness that's going on. But I'm sure if conversations were had prior to that, a different date probably would have been selected under the recognition that not everyone is operating under the same calendars. I was thinking about this. One example I could always talk about is that, I mean, well, never mind. I was going to say the lunar calendar is very prevalent, like outside of the West. So I'm thinking about like the Buddhist traditions that I study that also operate off a lunar calendar, but Muslim calendar as well. So
Thanks, guys. So in this last question, I did gesture to our certificate program here at CPACE, and we've talked about the importance of religious literacy, empathy, and leadership, and how they're all intertwined. As participants move through the certificate program, which you two both are the lead instructors for, how are they prepared to address real workplace challenges, such as in creating inclusive environments, managing conflicts across religious differences, and accommodating religious practices while still meeting organizational goals?
I'm going to ask John to start this answer because I think the way that we're teaching these classes with John doing more of the theoretical and myself doing more of the practical, I think that theoretical knowledge is really important as like a foundation. So I'll let him start.
Yeah. So when it comes to the workplace, again, I'm going to highlight, and this was like the big tiff within our class because we just got done teaching a class together. It wasn't a tiff, but essentially it's like theory or practice, right? Like which one comes first, the chicken or the egg, these kind of conversations. I've always leaned towards theory, just giving some type of structure, some type of scaffolding to work with, by which then I could kind of input my activities, my engagement with the world. Jessica, I mean, she'll probably talk about her own perspective, just who cares? Like, let's get down to the ground and do some things. But for me, to become an effective leader is really about educating yourself. I really don't see any way around it. Of course, you could be personable, you could be empathetic, but unless you're really going to take the time to get to know your coworkers, your boss, your colleagues, I feel like it'll always be this type of like superficial rendering of the workplace in itself. But going the extra mile to ask in all earnestness, right? So like authentic curiosity, not just kind of baiting someone into talking about their identity or their religious affiliation. That's never a good place to start, right? It has to be out of genuine curiosity. And for the most part, I mean, that's around building like real relationships. Now, that doesn't mean you become best friends and start hanging out outside of work. But again, it kind of leads to this peaceful framework in which Jessica was mentioning here. Now, we've talked about some of the different ways you could implement being more open and being more accessible to religious differences. But of course, within that, there has to be this idea of fairness, right? Because I do see some people might try and use religion in bad faith to get extra perks, in a sense that, they realize that maybe they're not going to do the additional work to find out what my tradition says about certain things. But if there is earnest in their request for certain things, I think there needs to be this type of flexibility within the workplace to accommodate different religious practices, orientations, and so forth. So whether that means, coming into work early, maybe 20 minutes on 3 days to make up an hour that they have to miss for some service that happens on Friday, right? That's still fair, right? Across the board, there's no special privileges given there. But it's being open to that type of flexibility that maybe workplaces wouldn't normally be open to, right? As maybe playing favorites or something along these lines. And so for me, again, it comes down to this just natural curiosity that we have, right? Being open to those conversations and just being honest with your curiosity. For the most part, my experiences with talking with people across different faith traditions, if there's a genuine curiosity to get to know more about their faith tradition, about them personally, they are very open to share that. Of course, it can't be forced. Most of the time, you have to build some type of relationship prior to that. But for the most part, people are open to those type of interactions. And it's just cultivating that, right? And so again, it's this tool set that we've been talking about, allowing us to kind of open up that space. Uh, I'll say more so in a personal kind of space, on a personal level, but then easily translatable into a work environment.
I think like this idea of religious literacy, um, there is a lot like, I mean, I used to say like you can ask Google and Wikipedia almost anything about a religious or non-religious secular tradition, and get a decent answer. You need to be skeptical. But right, and like now we have AI and all of these things, and we're terrified of it. But I think like this idea of gaining just the knowledge is step one. But then actually talking to other human beings and how they enact, how they authentically live out their values and beliefs is really what creates spaces that people want to be in, want to work in, want to, if they feel that they're supported, they want to benefit the community that they're a part of, their workplace, their nonprofit space, whatever it is, their school. And so for my piece, this more practical piece, or application piece, I should say, not more practical. The application side is looking at like self-reflection, like why do we individually have this curiosity? Why do we want to understand about the religious diversity around us? What are the things that motivate us, whether that's from our religious background, our secular background? But what are the things that we can do in our own lives to align like our heart, our minds, our actions, right? Um, and and the thing I'm gonna zoom out a little bit from just the workplace for a second because I work with high school students as well doing interfaith work. And a lot of times I'll get some adults that will question, like, well, if these kids are doing interfaith work, are they going to want to convert to another tradition? Are they going to leave their own tradition? And if anything, it makes them more committed to their traditions. And when we're talking that, so zooming back into a workplace, it's not going to be like creating religious literacy, creating or cultivating these skills of interfaith engagement, interfaith dialogue is not going to turn the workplace into this like religious space. What it's going to do is help people become more committed to the values that motivate them to be good employees, that motivate them to be good coworkers, that motivate them to be good community servants. Um, and that's they're not they don't have to leave a part of themselves at the door. They bring their whole self into that space, and that makes them a better person, a better human. And so talking about the skills in my portion of the course, like we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about like curiosity, really getting to the core why of why individuals are in this class. Cultivating our own hospitality, what it means to be a welcoming person, cultivating authenticity. How do we become confident in the way that we live out our individual traditions? Recognizing that conflict is inevitable. It's not an if conflict will happen, it's when conflict will happen. And how are we going to engage with that in productive ways? How are we going to make sure that we have built relationships based on trust and respect so that when the conflict happens, we'll be able to address it as whole people, not again, not like trying to segment ourselves out as like employee versus parent versus religious person versus whatever community baseball player or whatnot. Like we're whole people. And that's really what my portion of the course is focusing on.
Thanks,
I feel like I need to circle back now because maybe I misheard the question. So let me do a quick, like, 2 minute kind of roundabout about my portion of the class, which deals with like different theories of interfaith engagement and religious pluralism. Now, on the onset, I'm taking a focus primarily in America and when the interfaith moments, or the most influential interfaith moments in our past. And so, without a doubt, this goes back to the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893. And this is when we had it was the very first one where they invited different religious leaders from across the globe to come and convene. It was at Chicago. And this really kind of set the stage for the interfaith movement in America. So I wanted to stress that interfaith has always been around. There have always been certain practitioners that have been open to this idea, and it just seems more of a contentious idea in our contemporary times. And I think a lot of this has to do with the politics, with 9/11 happening in these different ways in which tension between these communities have developed. But there's more than one way in engaging with different religious traditions. And this is what my course focuses on, right? So the trajectory of the interfaith movement within America. And then we look at 4 different paradigms of what it means to be a religious believer. And I'll say again that this goes towards worldviews, right? So any type of humanist can be part of these different camps that I talk about. Now, the default one that most people think about is this notion of exclusivity, right? That there's only one proper religion. Now, for the most part, most people don't live out their lives like this, I would argue. I would say it's only the very radicalized, very, very conservative religious practitioners that think in terms of this, that there's only one right religion. Most people would just compartmentalize that aspect of their life, right? As if their religious tradition has no real bearings beyond that. And so we look at different ways in which this inclusivism kind of plays out in everyday life, going from what I call like a soft inclusive or exclusivism to like a hard exclusivism to that type of very conservative way of looking at it. And so I'll give examples of different religious traditions that advocate for that type of perspective. Now, what most people will find illuminating about my course is that you'll see that all religious traditions have like a spectrum of perspectives within this conversation between like exclusivism and religious pluralism. So the next one would be inclusivism, which talks about how one religion might have more representative truths for that individual, but other religions are part of the conversation. That is, they kind of coalesce in the end, whereby allowing greater conversation between one's own religious tradition and other religious traditions. Now, there's a lot of nuance in that one as well. And then we end with pluralism, religious pluralism, or we could say like inclusivist pluralism, which talks about a religious mentality that all religious traditions have some type of worth to them. They are all authentic. And we could see how that tends to just open up possibilities for dialogue, more so if you hold that type of perspective of pluralism. And so it takes about 8 weeks to kind of flesh these out in a kind of rudimentary, very, I'll say, accessible way. I did a lot of work making it like not heavily academic, but more applicable to anyone that's interested in these type of conversations. And by becoming more cognizant of these different paradigms, the hope is that you'll become aware of the breadth of what it means to be religious for religious practitioners in their communities. And it should also allow for greater dialogue between individuals that maybe you thought there weren't parameters for conversation before. So understanding that each individual, each community, each religious tradition has these different understandings about how religions can interact with one another, it opens up a space where we can have these authentic conversations and then lead to the more practical side, which then Jessica already mentioned.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jessica. I know we're quickly running out of time and I've had comments that this is a great conversation. I have 3 questions left, and then we can close it out. And as Robin has mentioned, if you have any questions from the audience, please feel free to type that in our chat. But I know something we've been dropping a lot in this conversation is the phrase religious literacy. And maybe just quickly defining it, what does that mean to you? And why is it such an important skill in today's places and communities, especially perhaps used for professional development?
So Stephen Prothero, or Prothero, coined this term. And from his book, Religious Literacy, one of my favorite quotes that like kind of encapsulates why this is important is he says, in America, our commitment to religion runs as deep as our understanding or knowledge of religion is shallow. Like this idea that there's a lot of people that are very committed to a specific religion, a specific worldview, um, a specific idea about religion, like for people that are agnostic, atheist, secular, right? And that is a very deeply held conviction, but our practical, actual knowledge or understanding of how people actually live the traditions, what people actually believe, how people actually like enact those traditions is very shallow. And so religious literacy is the way in which we gain, just like information literacy, right? Like religious literacy is just kind of a subsection of general information literacy. Like, can we um, take whatever stereotypes, biases, information that's coming at us, and can we sift through and figure out like what is the real, what is the reality? Um, and just like super practical examples, like we have the First Amendment that requires like religious accommodations, right? And so religious literacy allows us to effectively implement religious accommodations. However, that doesn't protect against the biases and discriminations that people still might feel, or the um, kind of subversive forms of discrimination that people feel within their workplace. And so creating a religious literacy, like the accommodation is basically the floor. We have a lot more work to do, um, from everything like the example I gave, making sure promotions are not on a major religious holiday, making sure meetings are not on religious holidays or do not push into a specific um, religious obligation, making sure that there's a variety of food options to accommodate all the different food practices. Um, as an instructor, I taught a night class once, and it was during Ramadan, and a student came up to me and said, like, with so much kind of trepidation, like, would it maybe possibly be okay if I took a break in the middle of class to break my fast? And I was like, yes, of course. Why wouldn't that be okay? And they're like, oh, well, I asked another professor and they told me I couldn't leave until the designated break. And I was like, that doesn't seem like okay. Um, and so, I mean, it's like very minor things like that that make, again, make our campuses, our workplaces, um, more welcoming and inclusive if we just have just a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of religious literacy.
Yeah, I really don't know how much. I think that's a really good definition. I don't know how much I could add to that, but I like the bare bones, I would say to religious literacy is like the founders, the scriptures, and of course, it doesn't have to be like in-depth knowledge, but then the holidays, because those are like the lived practices within those communities. I think that just those three things will go a long way, right? I guess dietary is the last one because there's a lot of misconceptions about some of the dietary practices that happened. And I'm a vegetarian, but I'm like Catholic, so most people don't assume, which is interesting. So again, it's just having these dialogues. There's so many assumptions that are made, um, that when you open up conversation with your colleagues, and you allow those conversations to happen, right? It's a twofold kind of movement. Um, then we're able to really accommodate in a very fruitful way, um, in workplaces and beyond, right? So even if it's just your friends. So yeah, just having a decent working knowledge of the different religious systems of the world, I think is crucial. And again, I'm going to throw this in. I know we said it several times tonight, but this includes like secular humanism. This includes atheism. Um, Even if you claim to have no type of orientation or worldview, that in itself is a type of orientation. So they're all part of the fold, right? How we orient ourselves in the world in which we live.
Amazing. And so I think I mentioned in the beginning, and thank you for you two for that definition, and your thoughts. I mentioned in the beginning that I've always believed that empathy is one of the hallmarks of effective leadership. Um, we can have very intelligent people, but if they're not trained to be empathetic and maybe human focused, then they fail at having some leadership qualities, right, or necessary leadership qualities. In terms of the interfaith program and your perspectives, how can leaders draw upon interfaith principles and religious literacy to create environments where people feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work?
I think Jessica started
Yeah,
most, so I could,
yeah, go for it.
is that fine? Okay. Uh, I mean, just again to reiterate, I mean, it comes down to just I'm thinking of different ways of expressing this notion of empathy and humility. Uh, but I think I might take one from Jessica, and that is just again some type of honest curiosity. I mean, you could tell when someone's being fake with you about trying to get to learn a little bit about you. And so there's this authenticity that goes along with it. And this is why oftentimes I frame interfaith conversations through like what it means to be human. That's why I talk about like the type of existential component to it, because there's such a rich diversity to what it means to be human. And if you're engaging someone with that pure type of curiosity without any type of like interior motives, that tends to show. And I think to just go into what Pahol was saying, I mean, if you have leadership that shows that type of empathy and openness to understanding and learning, um, ones that are, you know, they want to listen rather than respond, as these little quips go. I mean, that is effective leadership itself. And again, I just want to highlight again this notion of humility, that we don't have all the answers, and that when we open up conversations, I think we get a better picture of the dynamics, not only within our own life, but the workplace as well.
Um, I think to add to that, like that humility component, which I also would connect with like authenticity, right? Like I'm authentically coming into this space with some knowledge and some unknowns. Um, but beyond empathy being a skill, which I think it is a skill, but I also think that there's a way in which people can cultivate empathy to where it becomes part of their nature. Like it becomes part of it's a characteristic that it doesn't turn on and turn off, right? Like sometimes we're a little tired and so we're not living into our full being. But and so when I think about interfaith or like this interfaith ethic, as opposed to just a skill set, it's like really cultivating these characteristics of I don't just value being curious, but like I am a curious person. Like I cannot help not asking a question, right? I'm not just like I don't just think being hospitable is a good thing, but like I can't not offer you water when you come into my space, right? Like shifting from it just being a skill to being part of who we are, whether we're at work, at home, at the park, at our kids' soccer game, wherever we are, like we're embodying these characteristics. And that's I think what allows us and allows other people to be their whole selves.
That's perfect. Thanks, guys. I know we are really running out of time right now, but let me end with this question. Because the whole point of this webinar and to bring you two into the fold and to CPACE is for the certificate in interfaith leadership program that we have. So for those considering the interfaith leadership certificate program, what knowledge, skills, and experiences can they expect to gain from the program?
So when it comes to my
What was that?
course, yeah. So when it comes to my section of the course that deals with like different theories of interfaith engagement, um, I think it'll be very rewarding to learn the different ways in which different religious communities have been grappling with this question, particularly in light of globalization, right? There is no more homogenous societies. Everyone is diverse. And so learning to deal with different religious communities effectively has become a pretty hot topic within theological and like religious studies circles. And again, I'll highlight that most people tend to operate under one paradigm when it comes to religious difference. That is this type of like true false thing. But there are other options available that different religious traditions advocate for and have developed over the past decades, if not longer. And so there's different ways to deal with religious diversity outside of what you might typically see as like the kind of standard response. And if you open up that space, I think it leads to one of the core features that we've been talking about. It'll lead to greater curiosity, right? What else do these theories say? What else do other religious traditions say? And it's also kind of dispelling this notion that by learning another religion, you're somehow cheating on your home tradition. This is something that I encounter with some of my undergrads. They're hesitant to take a religious studies class because they think that it is somehow betraying their own religious convictions. And so there's this distinction between, informing yourself about a different religious tradition and then following or kind of committing yourself to that tradition. And so all in all, I think it's just a helpful way to kind of frame a lot of these worrisome, I could say, concerns that people have about religion and religious diversity and kind of setting the stage for greater engagement. So that's what I hope people take away from my end of the class and just humility, right? As we'll learn, we're only going to like the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to talk about these things, but it should spark conversation. It should spark curiosity, and it should spark greater engagement and desire to learn from our neighbors.
For my piece, I think the application portion of the course is really the takeaway is one, being able to look at the spaces that you're in, your school, your hospital, your corporation, and with that curiosity, ask like, how can I create a space that is more inclusive, that makes every single person that comes in here, employee, client, coworker, feel like this is a space that they are welcomed in. Alongside that, the skill and the confidence to lean into individual values and traditions. Again, practicing being your whole self in these spaces to be the example for other people to also be their whole selves in these spaces. And then the bridge between John and I, which is like the First Amendment, like making it very clear what the First Amendment allows us to do as far as giving us freedom of religion, freedom from religion, freedom to enact our beliefs in ways that are respectful and good for our collective society. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to end. And so I want to thank both you, John and Jessica, for sharing your insights and expertise with us this evening. And thank you to everyone who joined us in today's conversation. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, so this will be up on our website, and we'll be using this as a marketing outreach. We hope this discussion has demonstrated that religious literacy is more than just simply understanding different faith traditions. It's a valuable leadership, communication, and relationship building skill that can help us work more effectively across diverse communities, organizations, and workplaces. If today's conversation resonated with you, or you feel like it will resonate with someone you know, and you'd like to continue to explore these topics, we invite you to learn more about Cal State Long Beach and CPACE's Interfaith Leadership Certificate Program through the College of Professional and Continuing Education. The next cohort begins on June 22nd, 2026, next week, and the program is designed for professionals, educators, and community leaders. as well as anyone interested in strengthening their ability to engage through thoughtful differences. The cost is $9.25 or $1,500 for a bundle, and you will learn a lot, and there's a lot to offer. You can find it through our website at cpace.cscolb.edu. So on behalf of Cal State Long Beach and the College of Professional and Continuing Education, as well as the Beach Pluralism Project, thank you again for being part of this conversation. Have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you in the certificate program very soon. Thank you. Mahalo.